So this is the Templar Church in Garway. This is the main sort of defensive structure that the Templar built because they were a warrior group and they had many ties. It was a feudal time where they had ties to their feudal lords before they really had loyalty to the king. And a lot of this was represented in some of the people that you can see now buried in the Temple Church, which was made famous by the movie The Da Vinci Code, although I don't really believe in any of that. But as you walk around through this churchyard, you can tell this is more of a military structure, while these here are the churches. And as I walk around, I hope that the church is open, but what I really want to see is on the outside. And I found it in the shadow of the main defensive structure. If you walk a little bit through the grass here, you can take a look. This is not a lot of people come down here, but this is the original foundation of the 12th century Knights Templar church. And you can see it would have originally been a round nave representing the tomb of Jesus and the church in Jerusalem that is the spiritual kind of center of Christianity. There's another particularly beautiful Crusader cross. And here are the Welsh borders, the rolling southern Welsh borders. And England is just a few miles over in that direction over the river. I was really hoping the door was going to be open. I'm very lucky. It's getting later at night, but this church here has some original Knights Templar artifacts in it. And you got to know where to look. And right in front of me is the main place to look, because during a period of time in England, this altar stone was very, very forbidden. And so for several hundred years, it lied buried in the churchyard. And now it's up here, but it's 180 degrees as to what it should be. It's because it was plowed up by a farm tractor. But you can see this cross is carved in it, most likely by crusaders who had returned from the Holy War. And it's here where initiations would have been done. You can also see the thick walls of the church, the ancient wooden ceiling, and particularly interesting to me, apart from this tapestry of a Templar, is this, where the Templar would have been actually initiated into the order. Reflecting some of the negative attitude to the Knights Templar, you can see a lot of their graves, and these were graves of crusaders. You can see a sword here, beautiful carving of a sword, and then of a Templar symbol with a sword underneath it. So a lot of the altar was in fact remade with Templar graves. And I'm trying to walk around to see how much evidence I can see of this, but I think the two most famous in this church would be right here with the swords. This is Saint Michael, a very military saint, slaying the dragon. But he is sort of even now a saint for the military. He can be seen as well over here on his tapestry. There are some beautiful archways and organs, but as I said over there, you can see the Templar symbol. Their graves, the graves of these crusaders who are still technically most likely buried in the cemetery outside, making this holy ground, and their original altar which they would use to initiate new members, as well as the area down here where actual initiations would take place. If you walk up these steps on the side of the church to get an overview, you'll notice another one of the Templar symbols, which has been used, repurposed, to make these steps, and I'm not going to step on it. But from up here, you could make commanding speeches. Look how beautiful this church is. And then on top, an old wooden covering. I'm going to focus on this for one moment. This is the ancient altar stone. But if we zoom out from this altar stone, we'll see the church has a number of beautiful archways. And if we follow this one up, we'll notice something unusual. These are just regular stylized pillars. But if we go up and over past these beautiful patterns, we'll come down on the opposite side and see this. This is something called a green man. These are found across churches all over England and particularly in Germany, but they're considered to be sort of an extension of folkloric myth and local paganism. They're basically men that are sort of leaves. They're composed of leaves and vegetables and plant life, and it's considered to be tying in to Mother Earth, and probably religion would have taken a very spiritual tone in a place like this. As you come in the front door here, you can see a pretty good map of the church now. I'm hanging around the nave right now, but I showed outside there's remnants of the circular tower that used to be out there, some of it uncovered. And you can also see how thick the tower was because it was made to be a military type structure. And if you go into the chancel, you can see there's some walls that is very, very old. And this would be the building that is, I believe, over on this side in the, yes, this would be where the initiation would have taken place. This would be where that the symbol of the eel and the fish. So beautiful outside, and you would come in through here, dip your hands in the holy water, and then make the sign of the cross. You can imagine how many crusaders returning from the Middle East, from the Holy Land, would have come into here and been buried in this place. So not too far from the English border inside of Wales, there's this beautiful, beautiful church called St. Michael's of Garway. And it's a church that belonged for a while to the Knights Templar. And what's so unusual about it is that there's still a lot of sites here associated with the Knights Templar, and you can tell what purpose it used to serve. And for a while I was a member of the De Malay, which is a sort of junior Freemasonic group, so I have a little bit of knowledge of the history of the Knights Templar. And essentially, I just came here to show some of the sites and explain the history. Now, the Knights Templar was formed because the Pope called upon all of his people, all of the Catholics, and said that we have several heretical branches of Christianity. We have pagans in Eastern Europe, in the Baltic states, and then we have an occupation of the Middle East, of Jerusalem and the Holy Land. And so he called on anybody to just take up arms and go. So clearly the majority of these people would have been average farmers with no work, but then you also had some aristocratic people, landowners, wealthier people going on these journeys into the Holy Land. But it necessitated joining of groups, and these groups would often be led by higher ranking, higher class, these sort of warrior poets. And the Knights Templar were chief among these. And the Knights Templar, I guess you could consider them a sort of Navy SEALs of your average everyday man that's going out to fight in the Crusades. And the reason why the Knights Templar became such a power contender is because they didn't just go out there to fight Muslims, to fight pagans and heretics. They went out there to help pilgrims. And they quickly organized and said, hey, if you're going to be journeying to the Middle East, there's a real chance that you may be harmed, so we're here to protect you. Also, if you have a large amount of treasure and you don't wish to have that disappear should you die on your pilgrimage to the Middle East or to Jerusalem, you can give that to us, the Knights Templar. We'll keep it in a number of our castles. And this is before modern borders in Europe were drawn up. So the Knights Templar essentially held a certain amount of territory, held a certain amount of castles that were filled with gold. And you could be guaranteed to have a certain amount of interest because people were dying off on their journeys to the Crusades and leaving their gold inside the castles and weren't able to withdraw it. So you knew your money was going to grow, but you had to deposit a certain amount of money you had to have a certain amount of money to deposit before the Knights Templar would take you. So clearly it was the first semblance of like organized banking. And so a lot of people across Europe went into a great debt to the Knights Templar. One of the main contenders of these would be the King of France. And so the King of France went into debt to the group, and they finally started saying, "Are you ever going to pay us back?" And so this king goes to the Pope and says, "Hey, those Knights Templar guys, they worship Mary as a god, and they're heretics." So the Pope, after some deep thinking and realizing that most likely a lot of his good friends are in debt to the group, decides to declare them all heretics, and the Crusaders turn against the Knights Templar, which was previously one of the most powerful groups of Crusaders. What rises in their place is the Knights Hospitaller, and the Knights Templar either goes underground, there's some sites across England that, you know, it's believed they survived for several hundred years, or they come to England, because the English monarchy was sort of kind of forgiving of the Knights Templar, and it took them a few decades before they actually started saying, you either have to abandon your loyalties or leave our country. And no place in Europe was safe for them, so the Knights Templar kind of just fizzled out. But the modern day de Molay bases itself off of a man named Jacques de Molay. And this is where the bravery of the Knights Templar comes into place. Jacques de Molay was the last Grand Master of the original Knights Templar. The de Molay, and there is now a modern group calling itself the Knights Templar, but for hundreds of years the lineage just split, no longer existed. But the de Molay ended effectively when or the original Knights Templar was effectively ended when the French authorities captured Jacques de Molay and tortured him. And they attempted to torture him for several years into revealing the names of his friends and to revealing where the majority of his treasure lies. But he never did. And they gave him life in jail, and the King of France was so incensed by this that he demanded he be executed, and the King of France would be there to watch. And on his deathbed, they don't tell you this in de Molay, Jacques de Molay pointed at the executioner and at the king and said, "You will both be dead within the year." And sure enough, within 6 months they died. And this is also where the conspiracy comes into play, because you watch the movie American Treasure with, you know, Nick Cage, and it is true. Not where it went, but what is true is there were boats in the harbor that were laden with treasure, and they just set sail, and nobody ever saw them again. So nobody knows where these Knights Templar went with all of their, I believe, 7 boats laden with treasure. And out of 7, you would think that at least one of them would make it to friendly territory. And these are boats laden with gold and silver and precious jewels, and nobody ever saw them again. But churches like this show real evidence of their existence here. And I think it's a very, very interesting chapter of history.